For Julian Croft, a man who built a global tech empire on cold, hard data, the truth was the only currency he trusted. He lived in a world of absolutes of binary code and predictable outcomes. But the one truth he thought was sacred, the lineage of his infant son Leo, was about to unravel not just his multi-million-dollar marriage, but the very fabric of his reality. He filed for divorce, armed with the certainty of a CEO and a non-negotiable demand for a DNA test. The results would indeed come, but they wouldn't expose an unfaithful wife. They would expose a secret so profound, a truth so medically impossible, it would force him and his wife to question everything they ever knew about love biology and the child they both adored. The penthouse overlooked Central Park, a sprawling kingdom of green and grey laid out 70 floors below. From this vantage point, the city's relentless symphony, the distant wail of a siren, the perpetual hum of traffic, was muted to a respectful whisper. This was Julian Croft's world, a fortress of steel, glass, and silence that he had meticulously built for himself. At 42, Julian possessed the kind of restless energy that had allowed him to forge a billion-dollar software company, Croft Core, from a garage in Silicon Valley 2 decades ago. He was a man who understood systems, who saw life as a series of algorithms. You input the right data, you get the desired result. His wife, Isabella Rossi, was supposed to be his most perfect acquisition. They met at a gallery in Soho, where she was a curator. She was everything his life of code and boardrooms was not: warm, effusive, with a laugh that seemed to fill the sterile emptiness of his minimalist apartment. She spoke of art with a passion he usually reserved for quarterly earnings reports. Julian, a man who had everything, found himself wanting the one thing he couldn't quantify: her light. Their romance was a whirlwind, a publicist's dream. The stoic tech mogul swept off his feet by the fiery Italian-American art expert. Their wedding was an opulent affair at a villa on Lake Como, a carefully curated event that felt more like a merger than a marriage. For 2 years, their life was a glossy magazine spread, and then came their greatest project, a child. It hadn't been easy. The path to parenthood was a brutal clinical gauntlet of appointments, injections, and soul-crushing disappointments. They had turned to the most exclusive fertility clinic in New York City, the Genesis Center, a place that promised miracles for a price. After 3 grueling rounds of in vitro fertilization, their miracle arrived. Leo was 6 months old now, a gurgling, beautiful baby with wide, curious eyes and a tuft of downy brown hair. Isabella was a natural mother. She had given up her career without a second thought, her world shrinking to the dimensions of the nursery, and she had never seemed happier. Her love for Leo was a fierce, all-consuming force that Julian watched with a mixture of admiration and a strange, unsettling detachment. The detachment had started subtly. It was a quiet hum of discord beneath the surface of their perfect life. It began with a stray comment. "It's strange," Julian had said one evening, scrolling through old family photos on a tablet while Isabella rocked Leo to sleep. "My baby pictures. I had this shock of blonde hair, stick straight, and blue eyes, bluer than the Caribbean." Isabella had smiled, her eyes still fixed on their son. "Genetics are a lottery, darling. He has my brown eyes, my hair. Maybe he'll get your business sense, and we'll have the perfect combination." But for Julian, it wasn't a lottery. It was a data point that didn't compute. He started observing Leo with an unnerving intensity. He'd study the curve of the baby's ears, the shape of his nose, the tiny whorls of his fingerprints. He downloaded genetic inheritance charts, cross-referencing his own dominant and recessive traits with Isabella's. His best friend and Croft Corps' COO, Marcus Thorne, noticed the change during one of their weekly squash games. Julian's usual ruthless precision on the court was gone, replaced by a distracted, simmering frustration. "Everything all right, Jules?" Marcus asked, as they toweled off. "You seem a million miles away." Julian slammed his racket into his gym bag. "It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing." "Trouble in paradise?" Julian hesitated the words, tasting like poison on his tongue. "Do you think Leo looks like me?" Marcus was taken aback. "What, he's a baby?" "He looks like a baby. He's got Isabella's coloring, maybe. Who cares? He's a great kid. Everyone says that." "He has Isabella's coloring." "No one ever says he looks like me." "Not one person," Julian said, his voice low and tight. The algorithm in his head was malfunctioning. The inputs were his DNA, his wife's DNA. The output should be a child bearing a recognizable trace of him. But the output this beautiful baby boy felt. Alien. The doubt began as a whisper in the back of his mind, a single line of corrupted code. But in the sterile silence of his glass fortress, the whisper was starting to sound like a scream. He started coming home later, retreating to his study, the one room in the penthouse that Isabella rarely entered. It was his sanctuary of logic, filled with monitors displaying fluctuating market data. Here the world made sense. But outside that door, in the warmth of the home Isabella had created, lay a profound and terrifying uncertainty. One night, Isabella found him staring into Leo's crib long after the baby had fallen asleep. There was no fatherly adoration on his face, only a cold, analytical scrutiny. "Julian, what are you doing?" she asked softly from the doorway. He flinched, startled. "Nothing. Just watching him." "You've been so distant lately," she said, her voice laced with a hurt she could no longer hide. "Is it work?" He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Isabella, when we were at the clinic, the IVF process, it's all very clinical, isn't it? A lot of moving parts, a lot of people involved." Isabella frowned, confused. "Yes. Nurses, doctors, embryologists. What about it?" "There's a margin for error in any system," he continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Human error. It's unavoidable." A cold dread began to seep into Isabella's bones. This wasn't about work. This was about something far more fundamental. "What are you trying to say, Julian?" He looked from her to the sleeping child in the crib, and his gaze was filled with a chilling suspicion. "I'm saying I need certainty. I need to know the truth." Isabella felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The man she loved, the man whose child she had carried and birthed, was looking at her as if she were a stranger, a variable in an equation that wasn't adding up. The gilded cage had never felt so cold. The demand, when it finally came, was not delivered in a moment of heated passion. It was presented with the cold, dispassionate finality of a business proposal. They were in the living room, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of fallen stars. Leo was asleep in his nursery, blissfully unaware of the fault line that was about to rupture his world. Julian slid a folder across the polished marble coffee table. Isabella stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't a legal document, not yet. It was a brochure for a DNA diagnostics lab. "I've made an appointment for next Tuesday," Julian stated. Not asked. It's a simple cheek swab. For you, me, and Leo. We'll have the results in 48 hours. Then we can put this to rest. Isabella felt a wave of nausea. The sheer calculated audacity of it stole her breath. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not her husband, but a stranger, a paranoid, obsessive man she didn't recognize. Put this to rest. She repeated, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. You think a test is going to fix what you've already broken? You are questioning my fidelity, Julian. You are questioning the very foundation of our marriage, our family. You are questioning me. I'm questioning a data anomaly, he retorted, his voice clipped and precise. The child does not resemble me. It's a logical inconsistency that needs to be resolved. He is not a data anomaly. He is our son, she cried, jumping to her feet. He is the son I carried for 9 months. The son I went through hell and back for with needles and hormones and heartbreak. How dare you reduce all of that to a logical inconsistency? The IVF process is exactly my point. He countered, his own voice rising, the cool veneer cracking. It's a black box, Isabella. We hand over our biological material, and we trust a team of strangers to handle it correctly. You have no idea what happens behind those lab doors. I'm a systems analyst. I know that any system can be compromised. His words were a special kind of cruelty. He wasn't just accusing her of infidelity. He was devaluing the very experience of pregnancy and childbirth that had defined the last year of her life, framing it as a potentially flawed manufacturing process. So this isn't just about me cheating, she said, a bitter realization dawning. This is about some insane conspiracy theory where the most respected fertility clinic in the country somehow. What swapped your sample is that I'm not proposing a theory. I'm seeking data to form a conclusion, he said stubbornly. If the test proves he's my son, I will be the first to admit I was wrong. I will apologize, and we will move on. Move on. She let out a hollow laugh. There is no moving on from this, Julian. You don't get to light a fire to our home and then apologize for the ashes. The trust is gone. What you are suggesting is unforgivable. She refused. Absolutely, unequivocally refused. It was a matter of principle. Submitting to the test felt like an admission of guilt, a validation of his disgusting suspicion. Her refusal only cemented his belief that she was hiding something. The penthouse became a battlefield of Arctic silences and whispered, venomous arguments behind closed doors. Isabella threw herself into caring for Leo with a desperate ferocity, as if her love could form a shield around him. Julian, in turn, retreated further into his work, his interactions with his son becoming strained and rare. He saw the bond between Isabella and Leo, a seamless, innate connection, and in his paranoid state, he interpreted it as a conspiracy of 2 against 1. He felt like an outsider in his own home. 2 weeks after his initial demand, Julian made his final move. Isabella was feeding Leo in the sun-drenched breakfast nook when the doorbell chimed. Their housekeeper, Maria, answered it. A moment later, a man in a crisp suit stood in the archway, a leather satchel in his hand. Isabella Croft, he asked, his tone professionally neutral. Yes. He stepped forward and handed her a thick manila envelope. You've been served. Isabella's blood ran cold. She didn't need to open it. She knew. Her hands trembled as she tore the seal. The words leaped off the page, stark and brutal in their legalese. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She scanned the text, her vision blurring with tears. And then she saw the grounds, the reason cited for the divorce, and a choked sob escaped her lips. Irreconcilable differences arising from the petitioner's discovery of fraud pertaining to the paternity of the child Leo Croft. Fraud. He had called her a fraud. He had called their son a fraud. It was a declaration of war. He hadn't just filed for divorce. He had publicly, legally branded her an adulteress and their child illegitimate. The document also contained a motion to compel a DNA test, a financial restraining order, freezing their joint assets, and a demand for sole custody of Leo once paternity was clarified. He had built a fortress of glass and steel around her, and now he was systematically demolishing it, leaving her with nothing but the rubble. She looked from the papers in her hand to the innocent baby in his high chair, babbling and smearing sweet potato on his face. He was the only thing that mattered. Her first call was not to a friend or her family, but to the fiercest divorce attorney she had ever heard of, a woman named Eleanor Vance. As she explained the situation, her voice breaking, she realized Julian had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He thought his logic and his wealth made him invincible. He had pushed her into a corner, but he had forgotten one thing about Isabella Rossi. She was a mother, and he had just threatened her child. The unraveling was complete. Now the fight would begin. Eleanor Vance's office was the antithesis of Julian's world. It was located in a historic brownstone in the West Village, filled with overflowing bookshelves, antique furniture, and the scent of old paper and Earl Grey tea. Eleanor herself was in her late 50s, with a sharp, intelligent gaze that missed nothing, and a reputation for being a formidable strategist, with a surprising well of empathy. Isabella sat across from her, the divorce papers laid out between them, like a formal surrender. She had recounted the entire story, from the first unsettling comment to the brutal arrival of the process server. Eleanor listened patiently, her fingers steepled. When Isabella finished, her voice raw, the lawyer leaned forward. "He's a bully, Mrs. Croft. A very wealthy, very intelligent bully. And bullies, no matter how sophisticated, operate on one principle: intimidation. This document," she said, tapping the petition, "is designed to make you panic, to make you feel powerless, and to force you to capitulate to his demand for the paternity test." "I won't do it," Isabella said, the defiance returning to her voice. "It's a violation. I understand that." "Emotionally, it's a profound betrayal," Eleanor said calmly. "But legally and strategically, your refusal is hurting you. In family court, a refusal to take a paternity test when paternity is in question is often viewed as an indication that you have something to hide. His lawyers will paint you as deceptive. It gives him leverage. So I have to let him win?" Isabella asked, her heart sinking. "No, we are not going to let him win. We are going to take his weapon and turn it against him," Eleanor said, a glint in her eye. "We will agree to the test." Isabella stared at her. "But—" "On our terms," Eleanor continued, cutting her off. "We will file a response. We will agree to the DNA test contingent on it being performed by a neutral court-appointed lab with representatives from both legal teams present to witness the sample collection. We will state for the record that you are doing this under duress to protect your child from the cloud of illegitimacy your husband has created. We will frame this not as you surrendering, but as a mother taking the necessary steps to clear her name and secure her child's future. We will make him look like the paranoid, controlling aggressor." For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a flicker of hope. Eleanor's strategy was brilliant. It shifted the narrative. She wasn't a cornered wife anymore. She was a proactive mother fighting back. The next week was a blur of legal maneuvering. Eleanor's response was filed, and as predicted, Julian's high-powered legal team at Sterling, Lynch and Associates was momentarily thrown off balance. Their lead attorney, a notoriously aggressive litigator named Robert Sterling, had expected a protracted fight over the test itself. By agreeing, Isabella had neutralized his primary line of attack. A court date was set not for a hearing, but for the sample collection itself. It was to take place in a sterile conference room at a neutral mediation center. The days leading up to it were the longest of Isabella's life. She and Julian continued to live in the penthouse, their home now carved into hostile territories. They communicated only through clipped, formal text messages, mostly regarding Leo's schedule. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Every time Isabella looked at Leo, a wave of protectiveness washed over her, so fierce it was painful. This test was a formality to her. She knew she had been faithful. She knew Leo was Julian's son. She had carried him, felt his every kick, and stared into his eyes every day for 6 months. There was no doubt in her soul. The pain came from Julian's willingness to believe a phantom suspicion over the woman he had vowed to love and trust. The night before the test, Isabella couldn't sleep. She walked into the nursery and stood over Leo's crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The moonlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. Her son. In less than 24 hours, a piece of paper would officially confirm what her heart had known all along. And then the real battle would begin, deciding if a marriage so thoroughly poisoned by doubt could ever be saved. As she stood there, a memory surfaced. A small, insignificant detail from their time at the Genesis Center. It was the day of the embryo transfer, the most hopeful and nerve-wracking day of the entire IVF process. They had been in a private recovery room when a nurse had come in to check on her. The nurse was older, with tired eyes and a slightly harried demeanor. She had been complaining under her breath about being short-staffed, about a new computer system that was causing chaos with the labeling protocols. Everything is double-triple-checked. Of course, the nurse whose name tag read Brenda had reassured them with a thin smile. But this new software, it's a headache, thinks it's smarter than we are. At the time, Isabella had dismissed it as the casual grumbling of an overworked employee. But now, in the chilling context of Julian's accusations, the memory felt different. It was a tiny crack in the pristine facade of the infallible clinic. Human error. Any system can be compromised. Julian's words echoed in her mind. She shook her head, trying to banish the thought. It was ridiculous. A clinic of that caliber wouldn't make a mistake of that magnitude. Her mind was just grasping at straws infected by Julian's paranoia. This was about infidelity. That was the accusation on the table. Nothing else. The next day she dressed with deliberate care, choosing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. She was not a victim. She was Isabella Rossi, and she was going to reclaim her life. With Eleanor by her side, she walked into the mediation center, her head held high. Julian was already there with Robert Sterling. He looked tired, the strain of the last few weeks etched on his face. He wouldn't meet her eyes. A court-appointed administrator and a technician from the lab were present. The room was cold, clinical, and silent. The process was quick and deeply humiliating. The technician took a swab from inside Julian's cheek, then from hers. Finally, Eleanor held Leo in her arms while the technician gently swabbed the inside of the baby's mouth. Leo, startled, began to cry. The sound echoed in the tense silence of the room, a pure, innocent protest against the cold adult world that was failing him. The samples were sealed, labeled, and placed into a locked case. The results will be delivered concurrently to both legal counsels in 72 hours, the administrator announced. 3 days. In 3 days, the war would be over. Or so Isabella thought. She had no idea that the verdict she was waiting for would not be the end of the war, but the beginning of an entirely new and far more terrifying one. The truth was coming, but it was a truth that no one in that room could have ever conceived. The 72 hours felt like a lifetime suspended in amber. Isabella stayed with her sister Chloe, unable to bear the oppressive silence of the penthouse. Chloe's small, cluttered apartment in Brooklyn was a world away from the sterile luxury Isabella had grown accustomed to. It was filled with life chaos and unwavering support. "He's a monster," Bella Chloe said for the 100th time, bouncing a fussy Leo on her hip. "When this is over, you take that baby. You take half of everything that monster owns and you build a new life." Isabella wished it were that simple. Despite the anger and the betrayal, a part of her still mourned the man she had married, the life they were supposed to have. On the 3rd day, the call came. It was Eleanor Vance. Her voice was steady, but Isabella detected an unusual, unreadable tone beneath the professional calm. "The results are in, Isabella. They've been emailed to my office and to Mr. Sterling's. Can you and Chloe come in? I think it's best we review this together." The request for Chloe to be present sent a jolt of anxiety through Isabella. "Is everything okay? Just come to the office, Isabella. We'll talk here." The taxi ride to the West Village was a blur. Isabella held Leo tightly, his warmth a small comfort against the chilling dread that was creeping back in. In Eleanor's office, the air was thick with anticipation. Eleanor sat behind her desk, a single printed document placed face down in front of her. "Please sit," she said gently. Isabella and Chloe sat Leo now sleeping peacefully in his carrier at their feet. Eleanor took a deep breath. "As you know, the lab tested 2 things. First, the probability of paternity between Julian Croft and Leo. Second, as a control, the probability of maternity between you and Leo." She paused, her eyes meeting Isabella's. The results for Julian came back first. She flipped the paper over. Isabella's eyes darted to the bottom line, the bolded text. Probability of paternity set. The number was stark, absolute, a 0. Isabella stared at it, her mind refusing to process the information. It was impossible. A mistake. "No," she whispered. "That's wrong. The lab made a mistake. That's impossible." Isabella Eleanor said, her voice soft but firm. "The legal standard for exclusion is 0%. Julian Croft is not Leo's biological father." Chloe gasped, reaching out to grab her sister's hand. "Bella." Isabella's world tilted on its axis. A torrent of emotions crashed over her: confusion, terror, a profound sense of violation. She hadn't cheated. She knew this with a certainty that was as real as her own heartbeat. So how could this be? Her mind raced, grasping for an explanation. The clinic, a mix-up. Julian's words came screaming back to her. A system can be compromised, but before she could even voice this chaotic thought, Eleanor spoke again. Her voice graver than before. "Isabella, there's something else. This is unprecedented in my career. I've never seen anything like this." She slid the paper across the desk. Isabella's gaze moved past the paternity section to the lines below it, the part she had assumed was a mere formality. Maternal analysis. Isabella Rossi. Genetic markers compared to child. Leo result. The alleged mother, Isabella Rossi, is excluded as the biological mother of the child, Leo. Probability of maternity, 0%. 0%. The words didn't register at first. They were just letters on a page, a sequence of characters that made no sense. Maternity, 0%. Excluded as the biological mother. It was as if the air had been sucked from the room. Isabella's hearing faded to a dull roar. The patterns on Eleanor's antique rug swam before her eyes. The baby she carried inside her for 39 weeks. The baby she felt kick and hiccup. The baby whose birth was a searing, triumphant memory. The baby currently sleeping at her feet, whose scent she knew better than her own. He wasn't hers. A guttural sound escaped her throat, a sound of pure, primal agony. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of a soul being ripped in two. No. No. That's a lie. That is a lie. She screamed, lunging forward as if to tear the paper to shreds. Chloe caught her, holding her tight as Isabella began to sob, her body shaking uncontrollably. This is a mistake, a horrible mistake. I'm his mother. I am his mother. Eleanor Vance, for the first time in her unflappable career, looked utterly shaken. She rounded the desk, kneeling beside her client. Isabella, breathe. Just breathe. We are going to figure this out. At that exact moment across town, in a steel and glass conference room, Julian Croft and Robert Sterling were staring at an identical document. Julian had expected vindication. He had expected the 0% paternity result. He had steeled himself for the anger, the confrontation, the ugly but necessary end to his marriage. He was not prepared for the second 0. He read the line about the maternity results once then, twice then, a third time. The logic in his brain, the system on which his entire life was built, crashed. It was a fatal error from which there was no recovery. Fraud. He had accused her of fraud. He had imagined a simple, sordid affair. But this was something else entirely. This wasn't a betrayal. It was a cosmic impossibility. The baby he had rejected, the child he had refused to bond with, because he didn't see himself in his eyes, wasn't biologically his. But he also wasn't Isabella's. The woman he had called a liar and a cheat was a victim of something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He looked at the hard, triumphant face of his lawyer, who was already strategizing his next move. "This is incredible," Sterling was saying. "This changes everything. We can annul the marriage claim. She was never the mother. This is a clean—" "Shut up," Julian said, his voice quiet but laced with a new, terrifying emotion. Dread. "Just shut up." He stood up and walked to the window, staring down at the city below. For the first time, his fortress felt like a prison. He had wanted the truth. He had waged a war for a single piece of data. And now he had it. The truth wasn't a weapon that had won him the war. It was a bomb that had detonated in the center of all their lives, vaporizing everything: their anger, their accusations, their entire reality. He and Isabella were no longer husband and wife, locked in a bitter divorce. They were two strangers bound together by a shared nightmare, and by the love they both felt for a child who, according to science, belonged to neither of them. The divorce proceedings didn't just halt. They evaporated. The petition, the motions, the accusations of fraud, they all became meaningless artifacts of a reality that no longer existed. Robert Sterling, sensing the seismic shift, attempted to call Julian, but his calls went to voicemail. Julian Croft had gone silent. The first communication came not from lawyer to lawyer, but from man to woman. A simple text message from Julian to Isabella, sent late the night of the reveal. "I am so sorry, Isabella. I was wrong. About everything. Please just tell me you and Leo are safe." Isabella, huddled in her sister's guest room and staring at her sleeping baby, read the message through a haze of tears. The apology felt distant, hollow. Sorry couldn't stitch back the reality that had been torn apart. She didn't reply. The following morning, Eleanor Vance went on the offensive. This was no longer a divorce case. It was a potential criminal investigation and a massive medical malpractice lawsuit. She assembled a team, a private investigator, a medical law specialist, and a press relations expert to manage the inevitable media storm. Their target was singular, the Genesis Center. "They will try to bury this," Eleanor explained to Isabella and Chloe in her office, which had become their war room. "They'll offer a settlement demand, a non-disclosure agreement, and try to make this go away quietly. We will not let them." "There is another family out there, Isabella. A family that has your biological child. And you have theirs. We have to find them." The thought was a new, fresh wave of agony. Somewhere in the world, another woman was raising her baby. Her biological son or daughter. Did they look like Julian? Did they have his blonde hair and blue eyes? And the Garcias, the hypothetical other family, were they searching too? Or were they blissfully unaware, loving the child that was biologically Isabella's? The complexity of it was a crushing weight. The investigation began with a formal records request, citing the DNA evidence. The Genesis Center's initial response was a wall of corporate legalese and denial. They claimed their protocols were infallible. But behind the scenes, panic was setting in. The PI, a former NYPD detective named Frank Russo, began the painstaking work of backgrounding the clinic's employees. He focused on the staff who were on duty on the day of Isabella's embryo transfer, and one name quickly rose to the top of the list: Brenda, the senior embryologist. The same nurse whose comments about the faulty software had stuck in Isabella's memory. Russo's digging uncovered that Brenda had been passed over for a promotion 2 months before the Crofts' procedure. He also found something more compelling. Her daughter had been on a waiting list for donor embryos at a low-cost clinic for years, her infertility a source of deep family pain. Brenda was a woman surrounded by the daily miracles she provided for the wealthy while her own family suffered. It was a powerful, potentially dangerous emotional cocktail. While the investigation unfolded, Julian reappeared. He didn't come to the penthouse. He came to Chloe's apartment in Brooklyn. When Isabella opened the door, she saw a man utterly changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a haunted, desperate look. "Isabella," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know I have no right. But can I see him?" She wanted to slam the door in his face. She wanted to scream at him for what he had done. But looking at his broken expression, she saw not the monster who had served her divorce papers, but a man as lost and terrified as she was. And she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that Julian's connection to Leo wasn't severed by that DNA report. He was Leo's father in every way that mattered, except for the one he had prized most. She stepped aside and let him in. He walked slowly towards the playpen, where Leo was sitting, babbling at a set of colorful rings. Julian knelt down, his expensive suit looking out of place on Chloe's worn hardwood floor. He didn't touch the baby, just looked at him. For the first time, His gaze held no suspicion, no cold analysis. It held only regret and a profound, aching love. "His name is Leo Julian," said quietly, as if introducing himself. "Your name is Leo." From that day on, an uneasy truce formed. Julian didn't try to reclaim his home or his wife. He used his immense resources to aid the investigation. He hired his own team of forensic accountants to tear through the Genesis Center's financials, looking for any sign of a cover-up. He and Isabella were no longer fighting each other. They were fighting a common enemy, a shared, impossible truth. The breakthrough came a week later. Under the immense pressure of the impending lawsuit, a junior lab technician at the Genesis Center broke. She confessed to Frank Russo that she had seen Brenda acting strangely on the day of the Crofts' transfer. She had seen her stay late, working near the cryogenic storage tanks, long after her shift had ended, muttering about balancing the scales. Armed with this testimony, Eleanor and Russo confronted Brenda at her home in Queens. At first, she denied everything. But as Eleanor laid out the evidence, the timeline, the witness statement, the devastating DNA report, the older woman crumbled. Sobbing at her kitchen table, Brenda told them everything. It wasn't about a software glitch or a random mistake. It was deliberate. On that day, 2 sets of embryos were being prepared for transfer. The Crofts' A-grade, genetically perfect specimens from a wealthy, powerful couple, and the Garcias' another couple who had been trying for years their last viable embryo only, a B-grade. Brenda knew the Garcias. They weren't famous or rich. They were a school teacher and a fireman from Staten Island. In a moment of what she described as misguided, maddening pity, she had made a decision. She had looked at the 2 petri dishes side by side. The Crofts had everything, she reasoned. They could try again and again. The Garcias. This was their last shot. I didn't think of it as stealing. She wept, her face buried in her hands. I thought of it as a gift. I was giving their baby a better chance, a stronger embryo. I thought I was helping God. She had swapped them. With a steady hand, she had taken the petri dish labeled Croft and placed it on the tray destined for Mrs. Garcia. And the one labeled Garcia went to Isabella. She had falsified the logs, relying on the chaos of the new computer system to cover her tracks. She never thought anyone would find out. Who would ever think to run a maternal DNA test on a mother who had given birth? Isabella listened to the relayed confession in stunned silence. Her son, the child she had nourished and loved, was named Mateo Garcia. And her biological child, a boy, was being raised by a fireman and a school teacher in Staten Island. He was named Daniel. The hunt for the truth was over. But a new, even more agonizing journey was about to begin. How do you untangle 2 families, 2 lives, 2 sons bound together by a secret swap in a sterile lab? The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, Eleanor Vance's office. It was the most difficult, heart-wrenching meeting any of them would ever attend. Julian and Isabella arrived first, a united but fragile front. They had spent days in a state of shock, barely speaking, simply coexisting in their shared grief and confusion. Then Mariah and David Garcia arrived. They were a handsome couple in their late 30s with the kind of open, honest faces that immediately put one at ease. Maria was a kindergarten teacher with warm, expressive eyes, and David was a tall, solidly built fireman whose hands, though large, looked gentle. They radiated a nervous but palpable decency, and in Maria's arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was a baby boy with a shock of blonde hair and eyes as blue as the Caribbean Sea. He was the spitting image of Julian's baby pictures. Isabella's breath caught in her throat. Her biological son. Her Daniel. David Garcia, in turn, was holding a baby carrier. In it slept Mateo, the baby Isabella knew as Leo, with his dark hair and olive skin. He looked just like Maria. For a long moment, no one spoke. The two families stood on opposite sides of the room, separated by an invisible chasm of impossibility. The two babies, oblivious, were the bridges between them. Maria Garcia was the first to break the silence, her voice thick with emotion as she looked at Isabella. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We had no idea. He is so loved." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. I know she managed to say, her gaze fixed on the blonde baby in Maria's arms. "Our son, he is loved too." There were no easy answers. The lawyers could speak of legal rights and biological claims. But in that room, the four parents faced a reality that transcended law. They had each spent 6 months falling deeply and irrevocably in love with a child that was not by blood their own. To simply swap back felt like a brutal amputation of the soul. How could Isabella hand over the baby she had nursed and rocked to sleep every night? How could Maria give away the child whose every cry and coo she knew intimately? Over several more excruciatingly emotional meetings, a plan began to form. It was unconventional, messy, and without precedent, but it was forged from love. They would not swap the children. The bonds they had formed were too sacred to break. But they could not live in denial of the biology either. They decided to become a new kind of family. They sold their respective homes. Julian, in an act of profound atonement, bought a large duplex property in a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood in Park Slope, Brooklyn. The Garcias would live on one floor, and Isabella would live on the other. Julian, choosing to give Isabella her space, bought a smaller apartment nearby. Their lives became intricately, permanently entwined. The boys, Daniel and Mateo, would be raised as brothers. They would know the truth from the beginning in age-appropriate ways. They would have 4 parents who loved them. Weekends were spent together, holidays were a shared, chaotic affair. David taught Julian how to throw a baseball. Isabella and Maria bonded over their shared, unique journey of motherhood, finding solace and understanding in each other that no one else could provide. The marriage between Julian and Isabella was over. The trust had been shattered in a way that could never be fully repaired. But the anger had dissolved, replaced by a deep, complex, and respectful partnership. Julian's love for Mateo, they all agreed to keep the names the boys had been given, was no longer conditional on a DNA report. He was there for every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every milestone. He learned that fatherhood wasn't about genetics. It was about showing up. He also developed a tender uncle-like relationship with Daniel, his biological son, marveling at the tiny reflection of himself while respecting David's role as his father. The world saw a bizarre modern arrangement. But within the walls of their Brooklyn duplex, a fragile, beautiful ecosystem of love was thriving. It wasn't the life any of them had planned. It was messy, complicated, and often difficult. But it was real. Julian's vast fortune, which had once been the source of his paranoia about legacy and lineage, was now used to secure the future of 2 boys. The lawsuit against the Genesis Center resulted in a landmark settlement that not only provided for both families, but also led to sweeping reforms in the fertility industry nationwide. Brenda, the embryologist, faced criminal charges and lost her license, a tragic figure in a drama she had single-handedly created. One crisp autumn afternoon, About a year later, the four parents were at a local park. David was pushing Matteo on the swings, his laughter echoing in the air. Julian was on a bench with Isabella, watching Maria teach Daniel how to walk, his chubby legs wobbling with determination. "Do you ever think about the life we were supposed to have?" Isabella asked quietly, not with regret, but with a gentle curiosity. Julian watched his biological son take a triumphant step into Maria's arms. Then he looked at Matteo, the boy he had once rejected, soaring toward the sky on the swing. "The life we were supposed to have was based on a flawed algorithm," he said. "It was based on the idea that everything could be controlled, predicted. That love followed lines of code. This," he gestured to the beautiful, chaotic scene before them. "This is better. This is real." He hadn't found the simple truth he had been looking for, but he had found a better one. Family wasn't about data or DNA. It was about the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of love loss and the incredible unexpected grace of second chances. 5 years later, the rhythm of their life had settled into a steady, unconventional beat. The duplex in Park Slope was no longer a radical experiment, but simply home. The lawns were worn down by the ceaseless energy of 2 6-year-old boys, and the fence between the properties had long since been replaced by a wide, welcoming gate. Matteo and Daniel were in the same first-grade class, a fact that had initially raised eyebrows at the school, but was now accepted much like the presence of 4 parents at every school event. They were inseparable, a whirlwind of shared secrets and scraped knees fiercely protective of each other. Daniel had Julian's sharp, analytical eyes and David's steady demeanor. Matteo had Maria's artistic flair and Isabella's passionate heart. The challenge they were discovering came not from within their carefully constructed world, but from the outside. It arrived in the form of a parent-teacher conference with a young, well-meaning teacher named Miss Albright. The 4 of them, Isabella, Julian, Maria, and David, sat on child-sized chairs, a familiar, slightly comical sight. "They are wonderful boys." Miss Albright began smiling warmly. "Bright kind, and Daniel is a natural leader, while Matteo is so wonderfully creative, and their bond is just remarkable. But a question came up during our Families Week that I wanted to discuss with you all." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We were making family trees." Daniel drew a large oak tree with 4 main branches. When another student asked why he had 2 mums and 2 dads, Daniel just said, "Because my brother and I share." It was beautiful, but I sense the deeper questions are starting to form. After the conference, they gathered at their usual spot, a small cafe around the corner. The air between them was comfortable, forged through years of shared bedtimes, fevers, and birthday parties. "I knew the family tree project would be a landmine," David said, stirring his coffee. He was the rock, the one who always seemed to know the right simple thing to say. "But because we share, that's a good kid." Maria looked at Isabella, a silent communication passing between them that only they could understand. It was a look that acknowledged the phantom pain that sometimes surfaced on quiet nights, the ghost of a different life. "I worry about the day. Because we share isn't enough." Isabella confessed, her voice soft. "The day someone is cruel about it. Kids can be." It was Julian who responded, and his words surprised them all. "And we'll teach them that cruelty comes from ignorance. We'll teach them that our family isn't fragile. It's the opposite. It was built by choice. It was designed." He looked around the table. "Most families happen by default. Ours was a conscious decision, made by 4 people who chose love over anger and connection over biology. That makes it stronger, not weaker. The cold, data-driven CEO was gone, replaced by a man who had learned a different kind of logic. The logic of the heart. He was still a billionaire, still a force in the tech world, but his priorities had been fundamentally rewritten. His greatest project was no longer his company. It was this complex, sprawling, beautiful family. Later that evening, the truth of his words was put to the test. Isabella was tucking Matteo into bed. Mommy Matteo asked, his dark eyes serious. "Am I from your tummy?" Isabella's heart clenched, but she met his gaze without flinching. This was the moment they had all prepared for. "You grew in my tummy, sweetheart," she said, stroking his hair. "I carried you and kept you safe, and I was the very first person to hold you. And Mama Maria, her heart wanted you so much. She's your mum, too. You're the luckiest boy in the world." At the exact same time, in the apartment below, Daniel asked David a similar question. "Dad, why do I look like Uncle Julian?" David sat on the edge of the bed and pulled his son into a hug. "Well, buddy, the recipe to make you used a little bit from Uncle Julian and a little bit from Mum Isabella. But the ones who get to be your dad and Mum raising you and loving you every day, that's me and Mama. Maria. We won the lottery with you." It was their shared narrative. Simple, honest, and anchored in love. Later, from his apartment across the street, Julian stood at his window, a familiar ritual. He looked at the duplex, a warm beacon of light in the Brooklyn night. He could see the silhouettes moving inside, 2 families intertwined. He was no longer the lonely king in a glass castle. He was a vital part of a thriving, messy human ecosystem. He had lost a wife and a life he thought he wanted, but he had gained 2 sons and a definition of family more robust and meaningful than any algorithm could have ever predicted. The truth hadn't set him free in the way he'd expected. Instead, it had bound him to these people, to this life, in the most profound and unexpected way imaginable. And for the first time in his life, Julian Croft felt truly, completely rich. The incredible story of Julian Isabella and the Garcia family is a harrowing reminder that truth is often stranger and far more complex than fiction. They were thrust into an impossible situation, forced to confront the very definition of what it means to be a parent. What defines a family? Is it the blood that runs through our veins, or the unconditional love poured into a child day after day? Their journey didn't end with a simple answer or a neat resolution, but with the creation of something new, messy and profoundly beautiful. A family bound not by convention, but by an unbreakable shared love for 2 little boys. They chose love over law and connection, over biology, teaching us all that the human heart's capacity for love is the most powerful force of all. They say money can't buy happiness. But for Chloe Vance, it was the only currency that mattered. She had her sights set on the ultimate prize, a New York City CEO, a penthouse, and a life dripping in diamonds. She played her part perfectly, the irresistible siren luring Julian Croft away from his pregnant wife. Chloe thought she was writing her own fairy tale, securing her future, one secret rendezvous at a time. She never imagined that every whispered promise, every stolen kiss, and every expensive gift was just a scene in a much larger play. A play written, directed, and starring the one woman she dismissed as a casualty, the wife. And the final act was about to bring her world crashing down in the most public, most humiliating way imaginable. The view from the 80th floor penthouse was an ocean of glittering lights. Manhattan stretched below a concrete and glass kingdom, and from this vantage point, Catherine Sterling Croft was its queen. Her hand rested gently on the subtle swell of her stomach, a protective gesture that had become second nature over the past 5 months. The baby there first was a secret joy. She and her husband, Julian Croft, had nurtured a final perfect piece to complete the portrait of their enviable lives. Julian was the charismatic founder and CEO of Croft Innovations, a tech behemoth that had disrupted the logistics industry. He was the new money wunderkind, celebrated on magazine covers for his sharp mind and even sharper suits. Catherine, by contrast, was old money Grace. The Sterlings were a name synonymous with New York philanthropy and quiet, unshakable influence. Their union had been the talk of the society pages, a merger of dynamic innovation and established prestige. From the outside, it was perfect. The sprawling apartment with its curated art, the weekend trips to their estate in the Hamptons, the effortless access to a world of impossible reservations and exclusive events. Julian was attentive often, bringing home ridiculously expensive floral arrangements for no reason, or whispering how her pregnancy had only made her more beautiful. But lately the perfection had begun to feel brittle, like a flawless porcelain vase with a hairline crack invisible to the casual observer, but threatening to shatter with the slightest tremor. It started with the phone. Julian had always been attached to it, a necessary evil of his trade. But now it was an extension of his hand, angled away from her with a new subtle secrecy. Late-night strategy sessions became more frequent. Business trips to London or Tokyo were extended by a day, then 2 with rushed, staticky apologies. "Another late one, darling?" Catherine asked one Tuesday evening, her voice carefully neutral. She was arranging white peonies in a crystal vase on the marble island in their kitchen. The scent filled the sterile air, a fragrant mask for the anxiety coiling in her gut. Julian loosened his tie, dropping his briefcase by the door with a heavy thud. "You wouldn't believe it. The board is breathing down my neck about the Q3 projections. We're on the verge of a massive breakthrough, but the pressure is immense." He walked over, kissing the top of her head. His cologne, a custom blend from a perfumer in Paris, smelled faintly of sandalwood and something else, a cloying sweetness that wasn't hers, a floral note, something cheap. She forced a smile. "Well, you need to take care of yourself. And us." She patted her stomach meaningfully. His eyes softened, the guilt flickering so quickly. She might have missed it if she weren't looking for it. "Of course. You two are my world. Everything I do is for you." But the words felt rehearsed, a script he was reciting to convince himself as much as her. A week later, the first real tremor struck. Catherine was organizing their monthly receipts for their business manager, a tedious task she nonetheless performed with meticulous care. Tucked between a charge for a $1,000 dinner at Per Se and a payment to Julian's tailor was a receipt from Cartier. It was for a Trinity bracelet, the interwoven bands of rose yellow and white gold. A classic. It was dated 3 weeks prior. Her heart did a slow, painful lurch. It wasn't her birthday. It wasn't their anniversary. She had certainly never received it. She called her best friend, Olivia Brent, a sharp-witted art gallery owner who had been her confidant since their days at boarding school. "Tell me I'm being a crazy hormonal pregnant woman," Catherine said, her voice tight after explaining the receipt. "You're pregnant, yes. Hormonal, probably. But crazy." "Not a chance," Olivia stated flatly. "Catherine, you have the best intuition of anyone I know. If you feel like something is wrong, something is wrong. Men like Julian, They live in a world of temptation. They think their success makes them invincible. But he loves me, Liv. I know he does. I'm sure he does, Olivia conceded gently. But powerful men can be monumentally stupid. They compartmentalize. They think they can have the perfect wife and the bit on the side and keep the two worlds from ever colliding. What are you going to do? Catherine looked around the silent, opulent apartment. The city lights outside seemed to mock her. I don't know yet. I need more than a receipt. I need proof. If I accuse him and I'm wrong, I'll destroy what we have based on a feeling. And if you're right, he's already destroying it, Olivia countered. Be careful, Cat. Don't show your hand until you have a royal flush. The conversation solidified a cold resolve in her heart. The hurt was a deep physical ache, but beneath it the sterling steel was beginning to harden. She had not been raised to be a victim. She was a strategist, just like her father, a man who had dominated Wall Street for 40 years. She hired a private investigator, a discreet, expensive firm, recommended by her family's lawyer. She hated herself for it. It felt like a betrayal in itself, a clandestine act that sullied their marriage. But the Cartier receipt was a splinter in her mind, and she had to get it out. 2 weeks later, a plain manila envelope arrived via courier. Catherine waited until Julian had left for a weekend retreat with the board in Aspen. Her hands trembled as she sat at her rosewood desk, the city skyline, a grey, unforgiving backdrop. Inside were photographs, grainy, long-lens shots but unmistakable. Julian. He was laughing, his arm draped possessively around a young woman with fierce ambition in her eyes and a mane of artificially blonde hair. They were stepping out of a boutique hotel in Soho. In another photo, they were dining at a dimly lit table, their heads close together. In the final damning shot, the woman was lifting her wrist to admire her new piece of jewelry. The Cartier Trinity bracelet. The air left Catherine's lungs in a silent scream. The vase didn't just have a crack. It had been shattered into a million pieces at her feet. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony that consumed her. It wasn't just the betrayal of his body, but the casual cruelty of it. The lies whispered in their bed, the stolen moments, the gift, a symbol of trinity, of interconnectedness, given to another woman, while his wife carried their child. She wept. For hours, she let the grief wash over her, a storm of tears for the man she thought she knew and the life she believed they were building. She cried for her unborn child, who would be born into a fractured home. But as the sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the room, the tears subsided. The storm passed, and in its wake there was a chilling, profound calm. The hurt was still there, a cold, heavy stone in her chest, but it was no longer her master. It was fuel. Olivia was wrong. A royal flush wasn't enough. Confronting him would lead to tearful apologies, empty promises, a messy divorce where lawyers would pick over the bones of their life. Chloe, the woman in the photos, would likely get a settlement and fade away, a minor footnote in their drama. Julian might even eventually be forgiven. No. That was not justice. That was not a solution. It was a concession. A simple divorce was a release. What Julian and that woman deserved was a lesson, a reckoning, a meticulously crafted, perfectly executed ruin that would not only end their affair, but would dismantle the very foundation of the mistress's ambition and force Julian to confront the chasm of his own weakness. She picked up her phone, her hand steady now. She didn't call a lawyer. She called the one person in the world she knew would understand the need for something more than just revenge. The one person who would relish the game. Her brother, Marcus Sterling. "Marcus," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I need your help. It's about Julian, and I have a plan." Chloe Vance believed in manifestation, not the gentle yoga and incense kind, but a ruthless, focused targeting of desire. And her desire had a name, the 1%. From her cramped studio apartment in Bushwick, a stark contrast to the world she craved, she would scroll through Instagram and Forbes, studying the habitats and habits of the ultra-rich. She saw herself not as an outsider looking in, but as a predator studying her prey. Her friend Zara, who worked as a bottle service girl in a meat-packing district club, was her co-conspirator and enabler. "Look, Chloe," Zara had said, perched on the edge of Chloe's bed and filing her acrylic nails. "You're gorgeous, you're smart, and you're hungry. Don't waste that on some broke artist who thinks sharing an Uber is splurging. You're built for better things. You just need the right launch pad." Chloe couldn't agree more. She'd worked for 2 years as a junior marketing associate at a stodgy second-tier tech firm, watching men with half her wit and 1/10 of her drive get promoted because they'd gone to the right schools or played golf with the right people. She saw the system was rigged, so she'd decided to rig it back in her favor. Marriage, she concluded, was the fastest, most effective merger and acquisition a woman like her could execute. Julian Croft became her target by design. She'd read a feature on him in Wired magazine detailing his meteoric rise. He was brilliant, driven, and most importantly married to a woman who seemed in Chloe's estimation to be a boring old money placeholder. Catherine Sterling Croft was beautiful in a classical, understated way, but she lacked the fire, the edge that Chloe cultivated. She was a museum piece. Chloe was a living flame. Chloe engineered their first meeting with the precision of a military campaign. She learned from a disgruntled ex-employee on LinkedIn that Julian often went for a solitary drink at the Aviary, a high-end cocktail bar in Columbus Circle, to decompress after a tough week. She chose her armor carefully, a silk slip dress that was just a little too daring for the venue heels that made her legs look endless, and a perfume, a heady, almost aggressive gardenia scent that was impossible to ignore. She sat at the bar, nursing a single expensive cocktail, and waited. When Julian walked in, looking weary and powerful, she accidentally caught his eye and gave him a small conspiratorial smile. As he sat a few stools down, she pretended to be engrossed in a book, ironically, a biography of Napoleon. It took him less than 10 minutes. "That looks like heavy reading for a Friday night," he said, his voice as smooth as the aged whiskey the bartender was pouring for him. Chloe looked up, feigning surprise. "I find it's best to learn from those who knew how to conquer the world." She closed the book, her fingers tracing the title. "Chloe Vance," she said, extending a hand. Her nails were immaculate, painted a deep predatory red. "Julian Croft." "I know," she said with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "Everyone in the tech world knows who you are." The hook was in. He was flattered. Over the next hour, she played him like a virtuoso. She was impressed by his work, but not starstruck. She challenged his opinions on market trends, showing she was more than just a pretty face. She listened intently, her gaze never wavering, making him feel like the only man in the universe. She was a perfect cocktail of intellect, beauty, and unabashed admiration. She never mentioned his wife. When he glanced at his wedding ring, a solid platinum band, she simply let her eyes follow his. a flicker of something disappointment, understanding passing through them before she smiled and changed the subject. She was planting a seed she doesn't judge, she understands. He walked her to the curb to get a taxi. "I shouldn't," he said, the internal conflict clear on his face. "But I'd love to continue this conversation." "I'm not a home wrecker, Julian," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was electric. "But I'm also not blind. I see a man who isn't being celebrated. If you ever want to talk to someone who gets it, you have my number." She had already written it on a napkin and slipped it into his suit pocket when he wasn't looking. It was a bold, presumptive move, and it paid off. He texted her the next day. Their affair escalated quickly from discreet lunches in out-of-the-way bistros to afternoons in the sterile luxury of a suite at the Greenwich Hotel. Chloe was everything Catherine wasn't. Where Catherine was calm, Chloe was fiery. Where Catherine's world was one of quiet legacy, Chloe's was one of fierce, palpable ambition. She made Julian feel like a king, a conqueror, not just a husband. "She doesn't understand the pressure you're under," Chloe would murmur, tracing the lines of his jaw as they lay in the post-coital tangle of hotel sheets. Her money was inherited. Yours is earned. It's different. It's real. She was an expert at identifying his insecurities and soothing them. She praised his riskiest business decisions, validated his frustrations with his board of directors, and made him feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. She was the ultimate cheerleader for the cult of Julian Croft, and he in turn showered her with gifts. It started small, a bouquet of exotic orchids delivered to her apartment, a first-edition book she'd mentioned. Then it escalated. A shopping spree on Fifth Avenue, a weekend in Miami on a business trip, and then the Cartier bracelet. He presented it to her in their hotel room. The famous red box sat on the pillow. Chloe's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. This was the moment a man transitions a woman from a dalliance to an investment. "Julian, it's beautiful." She breathed her performance of awe-struck gratitude. Pitch perfect. She allowed a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. "But you shouldn't have." "I wanted it to," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of desire and guilt. "You deserve beautiful things." As he fastened the cool gold around her wrist, she looked at her reflection in the mirror. The bracelet was a shackle of a different kind, one of victory. She had him. The CEO was hers. She thought of his pregnant wife somewhere in their palatial penthouse, probably arranging flowers or planning a nursery, blissfully unaware. Chloe felt a flash of pity, quickly replaced by a surge of triumph. The woman hadn't fought for her man. She had grown complacent, secure in her position, and had left the door wide open for someone like Chloe to walk right in. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked, kissing her shoulder. Chloe met his eyes in the mirror, her expression a carefully constructed mask of adoration. "I'm thinking," she said, her voice a seductive whisper, "that I'm the luckiest woman in the world." She was playing the long game. The bracelet was a down payment. The end goal was the full buyout. His name, his fortune, his life. The pregnant wife was a temporary obstacle, one that Chloe was confident would soon be removed. She had studied her target, laid her trap, and secured her prize. She was the serpent in their Eden, and she had just convinced Adam to take the first bite. She was so focused on the apple, she never once thought to look up and see God watching. The days following the arrival of the investigator's report were a masterclass in composure for Catherine. On the surface, nothing changed. She continued her work with the Sterling Family Foundation, attended her prenatal yoga classes, and discussed nursery color palettes with an interior designer. She greeted Julian with a serene smile when he returned from his bored retreat, a weekend he'd spent with Chloe in a luxury ski lodge according to the PI's follow-up email. She listened to his stories of high-altitude negotiations, her heart a frozen stone in her chest. Each lie he told was another brick in the wall she was building around it. Her grief, once a raging inferno, had been banked and forged into something cold, sharp, and patient. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about protecting her legacy and her child's future from the collateral damage of Julian's weakness and his mistress's greed. Her brother Marcus Sterling arrived at the penthouse 2 days after her call. He was Catherine's opposite in many ways. While she was composed and classical, Marcus was a whirlwind of creative energy and roguish charm. He'd flirted with acting in his 20s, much to their father's chagrin, before finding his niche in venture capitalism, backing boutique hotels and eccentric art projects. He had a chameleon's ability to adapt to any situation and an actor's love for a dramatic role. Most importantly, he was fiercely loyal to his sister. He found her in the library, the damning photos spread across the antique desk. He looked at them, his jaw tightening, then at his sister's pale, determined face. "I could have him ruined on Wall Street by morning," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. A few calls, a few whispered rumors about instability at Croft Innovations. His stock would plummet. Catherine shook her head, pushing the photos into a neat pile. "No, that hurts me. It hurts the baby. And it's too simple. Julian's crime isn't just infidelity, it's arrogance. He thinks he's untouchable. And this woman..." She gestured to the image of Chloe laughing and radiant with Julian's stolen affection. "Her crime is ambition. She doesn't want Julian. She wants what he represents. A key to a kingdom she feels entitled to." So we don't destroy the kingdom," Catherine said, her eyes gleaming with a cold, intelligent light. "We present her with a bigger one. We make her believe she's trading up. We make her discard Julian like he's last season's handbag." Marcus leaned back, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. He recognized the look in his sister's eyes. It was the same look their father got before a hostile takeover. "Oh, this is much better than my idea. You want to humiliate them both. You want to make him feel the sting of being tossed aside for a better offer. And you want to strip her of everything when she reaches for it. This is diabolical. I love it. Tell me the plan." For the next 4 hours they plotted. It was a creative, exhilarating process, a dark storm of ingenuity that pushed Catherine's pain into the background. They were no longer the victim and the avenger. They were architects. The cornerstone of their plan was a new character, Sebastian Thorne. "He needs to be everything Julian is, but more," Catherine dictated, pacing back and forth. "If Julian is a millionaire, Sebastian is a billionaire. If Julian has a penthouse, Sebastian has a private island. If Julian flies first class, Sebastian owns the jet." Marcus, a natural performer, was already getting into character. "He's not American," he declared. "Too easy to check. He's European, old family, but he made his own fortune. Media shy, a recluse. No social media footprint to speak of, which makes him mysterious and impossible to Google stalk effectively." They built Sebastian Thorne from the ground up. He was the heir to a defunct German industrial fortune who had brilliantly reinvested in rare earth minerals and private space exploration. His company, Thorne Global, was based in Zurich, with satellite offices in Hong Kong and London. He was in New York for a few months to quietly explore new investment opportunities. "We need to create a legend," Marcus said, scribbling notes on a legal pad. He needs to be seen in the right places, but only briefly, a flash of impossible wealth. They began to choreograph the operation. Phase 1. The sighting. Marcus as Sebastian would start appearing at the periphery of the high-end world. He'd attend a Christie's auction and outbid a known hedge fund manager for a piece of modern art. He'd be seen dining at Daniel, but in the private skybox, a privilege reserved for a select few. He wouldn't interact. He would only be observed. Whispers would start. Who is that man? Phase 2, the lure. They needed to get Sebastian and Chloe in the same room. Olivia Catherine's art gallery owner friend was brought into the circle of trust. Her upcoming gallery opening, showcasing a trendy new photographer, was the perfect venue. Chloe, eager to be seen as a patron of the arts and to elevate her social standing, would undoubtedly be there on Julian's arm. That's where Sebastian will make his first move, Catherine planned. Subtle. He'll admire the same piece of art she's looking at. He'll make a quiet, insightful comment. He won't try to pick her up. He'll just plant a seed of intrigue. Phase 3. The escalation. This was the core of the honey trap. Sebastian would orchestrate a series of chance encounters. He would overwhelm Chloe not with crude displays of cash, but with a level of sophistication and access that would make Julian's world seem provincial. He wouldn't just send flowers. He'd send a rare orchid that was flown in that morning from Costa Rica with a simple handwritten note in German. He wouldn't offer a shopping spree. He'd mention he was flying to Milan for a suit fitting and casually ask if she'd like to join him. We need to make Julian look like the minor leagues. Marcus grinned, the thrill of the performance dancing in his eyes. We need her to see Julian as a stepping stone she's outgrown. Phase 4. The trap. The final act would take place at the Sterling Family Foundation's annual charity gala. It was the pinnacle of the New York social calendar, an event Chloe would be desperate to attend as a sign of her arrival. By then, Catherine calculated Chloe would have left Julian and would be expecting to make her grand debut on the arm of the elusive billionaire Sebastian Thorne. That's where the curtain would fall. To make Sebastian Thorne real, they spared no expense. Marcus was given a new wardrobe of bespoke suits, a Patek Philippe watch from the family vault, and a black Amex card with no conceivable limit. They rented a black Maybach with a driver. They even had their tech team create a shell website for Thorne Global, a single elegant landing page with a login portal and the words discretion, vision, power. As they finalized the details, Marcus looked at his sister with a newfound respect. The fragile, heartbroken woman was gone. In her place was a general commanding an army. "Are you sure about this cat?" he asked quietly, the game momentarily forgotten. "Once this starts, there's no going back. For you and Julian either." Catherine looked out at the city lights, her reflection, a pale ghost in the glass. Her hand went to her belly. "Julian and I, as we were." That ended the moment he gave another woman that bracelet. "I'm not destroying my marriage, Marcus. I'm discovering what's left of it, and I'm protecting my child's birthright from a predator. This isn't just revenge on her. It's a test for him. Let's see how he reacts when the worm turns. Let's see what he's made of when he's the one who gets thrown away." Her voice was as cut and clear as ice. The plan was in motion. The architect had drawn the blueprints. Now it was time to start building the trap. The trap was baited at Olivia Brent's gallery, opening in Chelsea. The cavernous, white space buzzed with the city's self-appointed cultural elite. Champagne flowed and the air crackled with networking and air kisses. Chloe arrived, clinging to Julian's arm like a trophy. She was wearing a crimson dress that was a shade too loud for the minimalist art on the walls, a deliberate choice to ensure she stood out. She surveyed the room with the keen eye of a hawk cataloguing the influential faces, desperate to be seen to be included. Julian looked distracted. A man pulled in two directions. He introduced Chloe to a few acquaintances, with a forced casualness that didn't go unnoticed, referring to her as a marketing consultant. The lie hung awkwardly in the air. Catherine had prepared Marcus meticulously. "Don't approach her directly," she'd instructed. "Let her see you. Let her feel your presence before you ever say a word." Marcus, in his persona as Sebastian Thorne, was a masterpiece of understated power. He wore a dark, tailored suit with no tie, a look of effortless European elegance. He didn't mingle. He stood alone near a large, dramatic photograph of a stormy sea, a glass of mineral water in his hand, observing the scene with a look of detached amusement. He radiated an aura of such profound self-assurance that he created his own gravitational pull. People noticed him. They whispered. Chloe noticed him. While Julian was cornered by a tech journalist, she found her eyes drifting to the mysterious stranger. He was handsome, but more than that, he was intriguing. He wasn't working the room. He was above it. As she moved to get a fresh glass of champagne, she found herself standing near the same photograph he was observing. "It's powerful, isn't it?" A deep voice with a faint, unplaceable European accent said beside her. She turned. It was him. Up close, his presence was even more formidable. "It is," she managed her voice, a little breathless. "It feels chaotic and beautiful at the same time." "A perfect metaphor for life," he said, his eyes scanning the photograph, not her. "It's by a German artist I collect. He manages to capture the sublime terror of nature. Most people just see a pretty picture of a wave." He finally turned his gaze to her, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, seemed to look right through her. "You don't strike me as someone who just sees the pretty picture." Chloe felt a jolt. He wasn't just complimenting her looks, he was complimenting her perception. It was a far more sophisticated line than any she had heard before. "I try not to be," she said, her voice dropping to a more intimate register. "I am Sebastian," he said, giving a slight bow of his head instead of offering a hand, a deliberately formal old-world gesture. "Chloe," she replied. Before she could say more, Julian reappeared at her side. "Everything okay?" he asked, his arm sliding possessively around her waist. He eyed Sebastian with a flicker of territorial suspicion. Sebastian gave Julian a dismissive glance, a micro-expression of such profound disinterest that it was more insulting than any glare. "Enjoy the evening," he said to Chloe, and then he simply turned and walked away, melting into the crowd. The seed was planted. Over the next 2 weeks, Sebastian Thorne executed Phase 3 with surgical precision. The encounters were always seemingly by chance, yet perfectly engineered to showcase the chasm between Julian's wealth and Sebastian's. One afternoon, as Chloe was having lunch with her friend Zara at an outdoor cafe in Soho, a sleek black Maybach purred to a stop at the curb. The driver opened the door, and Sebastian Thorne emerged. He spotted Chloe, and a slow smile spread across his face. He came over to their table. "Miss Vance, a pleasure to see you again," he said. Zara was staring, her jaw practically on the table. He didn't stay long. He was on his way to a meeting, something about geothermal prospecting in Iceland. He dropped the phrase so casually, it was like someone else mentioning a trip to the grocery store. Before leaving, He looked at the wilted rose in the small vase on their table. The next morning, the reception desk at Chloe's marketing firm called her. A delivery had arrived. It was a breathtaking arrangement of black baccarat roses, so dark they were almost velvet, with a simple card. These seemed more fitting. There was no phone number, no desperate plea for a date, just a gesture of overwhelming, mysterious elegance. Julian had sent her roses the week before, a standard dozen red ones that now seemed pathetic by comparison. The final decisive blow came a week later. Chloe was complaining to Julian over dinner about her frustration with her job. "They're so small-minded, Julian. I have ideas that could revolutionize their entire strategy, but they won't listen." "It takes time to climb the ladder, honey," Julian had said a touch condescendingly. The very next day, a courier delivered a thick envelope to her office. Inside was a first-class ticket to Milan on a private charter dated for the upcoming weekend. The note was brief. "I'm told the finest business armor is forged in Italy. I have a fitting with my tailor Brioni. I've taken the liberty of arranging a consultation for you as well. A mind like yours deserves a wardrobe to match. A car will be at your apartment on Saturday morning. It is, of course, entirely your choice." This was it. This was the checkmate move. It wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge. It was an invitation into a world Julian Croft, for all his millions, couldn't access. The world of private jets, bespoke Italian suits, and casual globe-trotting power. She looked at the Cartier bracelet on her wrist. A few weeks ago, it had felt like the ultimate prize. Now it felt like a trinket, a consolation prize from the minor leagues. Her decision was swift and brutal. She broke up with Julian that night in his car after he'd taken her to dinner. He was talking about a potential site for a new distribution center in New Jersey. His world suddenly seemed so small, so domestic. "Julian, I don't think this is working," she said, her voice cool and practiced. He was stunned. "What are you talking about? We were just in Miami. I bought you—" "This isn't about what you can buy me," she lied, cutting him off. "It's about ambition. I need to be with someone who is bigger, who sees the whole world as a chessboard, not just a single market sector. I think you've gotten comfortable. I haven't." The words were chosen to wound his ego, the most vulnerable part of any man like him. He was speechless. He, Julian Croft, the tech titan, being told he wasn't ambitious enough. By the woman he had risked his marriage for. The irony was lost on him, submerged in the sting of rejection. "Is there someone else?" he finally asked, his voice tight with wounded pride. Chloe gave him a pitying look. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, leaving the question hanging just enough to be a yes. "I just think we want different things. I wish you the best, Julian. Truly." She got out of the car and walked away without looking back, leaving him sitting in the stunned, humiliated silence. She felt a moment pang of something. Not guilt, but perhaps the thrill of the kill. She had discarded a CEO. She was on her way to bigger things. Back in her apartment, she packed. She looked at the ticket to Milan, her heart pounding with triumphant anticipation. She was Chloe Vance, and she was about to be outfitted in the armor of a queen, ready to take her place beside a true king. She had played the game and won. The invitation to the Sterling Foundation Gala had arrived in the mail that day, a thick, creamy card with embossed lettering. She had initially planned to pressure Julian into taking her. Now she would arrive with Sebastian Thorne. It would be her true coronation. She imagined the look on the face of Julian's mousy, pregnant wife when she saw who had replaced her. It was all falling into place more perfectly than she could have ever imagined. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a symphony of opulence. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto a sea of New York's most powerful and influential figures. The theme of the Sterling Family Foundation Gala was Foundations for the Future, a celebration of the charity's work in funding education for underprivileged children. For the guests, however, it was the ultimate arena for showcasing status and wealth. Chloe Vance made her entrance feeling like she had finally arrived at the center of the universe. She wore a gown of liquid silver, a custom piece she'd acquired in Milan on her whirlwind trip with Sebastian. It clung to her every curve, audacious and dazzling. On her arm, however, was not the billionaire she expected. Sebastian had called her that afternoon, his voice a smooth apology. A sudden, unavoidable crisis with his Zurich office. A satellite launch had experienced a minor orbital deviation. The words were so fantastically important, so far beyond the scope of normal life, that she couldn't possibly be upset. "I will be there, my dear, I promise," he'd said. "But I will be late. Please go ahead. My driver will take you. I want you to make your entrance. You will be the most radiant woman in the room. I will find you the moment I arrive." So she had arrived alone, a move that was in itself a statement of confidence. She walked in, not as a +1, but as a woman who belonged. She could already feel the whispers, see the curious glances. Who is she? The story she would tell that she was waiting for. Sebastian Thorne would only add to her mystique. Her eyes scanned the room. Searching. She saw Julian almost immediately. He was standing near the bar, looking drawn and haggard, nursing a scotch. He saw her, and his face tightened with a mixture of pain and anger. Chloe met his gaze for a moment, giving him a small, pitying smile before turning away. The satisfaction was exquisite. Then she saw her. Catherine Sterling Croft was standing at the center of a small group, the undeniable focal point of the room. She was not in a flashy gown, but an elegant, deep blue velvet dress that fell gracefully over her pregnant form. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears, the kind of quiet, heavy jewels that are passed down through generations, not bought on a whim. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention. She simply was. She radiated a serene, unshakable power that made Chloe's silver dress suddenly feel cheap and desperate. The two women's eyes met across the crowded room. Catherine offered a polite, enigmatic smile, a queen acknowledging a courtier. Determined to seize the moment, Chloe began to circulate, dropping Sebastian's name into conversations with calculated nonchalance. "Oh, this old thing," she'd say of her dress. "Sebastian insisted I have it made in Milan." Or, "Sebastian is hoping to make it, he's just dealing with a minor orbital deviation with one of his satellites." The reactions were a mixture of awe and confusion, which was exactly what she wanted. An hour into the event, a hush fell over the room as Catherine took to the stage to give the welcome address. She spoke eloquently about the Foundation's mission, her voice calm and clear. "We build foundations for children," she said, her eyes sweeping the room. "But we must also be vigilant about the foundations of our own lives. We must ensure they are built on trust, integrity, and truth. Because when those foundations are weak, everything built upon them is at risk of collapse." The words seemed to hang in the air, freighted with a meaning that only a few people in the room could begin to grasp. Julian shifted uncomfortably. Chloe felt a prickle of unease. After her speech, Catherine descended the stage and began to move through the room. Chloe watched her, a predator sizing up her rival. She decided now was the time. She would go over, introduce herself, and deliver the final killing blow, the casual mention of her new superior benefactor. But before she could move, Catherine was walking directly toward her. "Miss Vance," Catherine said, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm Catherine Croft. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Chloe was momentarily thrown. She had expected to be the one in control of this encounter. "It's a pleasure," Chloe said, recovering quickly. "Your speech was very moving." "Thank you," Catherine replied, her eyes holding Chloe's. "I saw you come in alone. Are you waiting for someone?" This was the opening. "I'm actually," Chloe said, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "Sebastian Thorne. I'm not sure if you know him. He's quite private." Catherine's smile widened. "Sebastian Thorne," she repeated, tasting the name. "Yes, I know him very well. In fact, he's just arrived." Chloe's heart leapt. She turned her eyes, scanning the grand entrance, expecting to see the handsome, powerful man who was about to solidify her new life. "Allow me to make the introduction," Catherine said, and raised a hand. From the crowd, a man emerged, walking toward them. But it wasn't the suave European billionaire. It was Marcus Sterling, Catherine's brother. He was wearing the same bespoke suit and the Patek Philippe watch, but his expression was different. The cool detachment was gone, replaced by a look of wry, theatrical amusement. Chloe stared, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. "You're—" "Her brother," Marcus said, gesturing to Catherine. "Marcus Sterling, at your service." He gave a mocking bow. "Though for the past few weeks you've known me as Sebastian." The blood drained from Chloe's face. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. The murmurs around them, which had been a gentle buzz, were now a roaring in her ears. She looked from Marcus's smirking face to Catherine's calm, victorious expression. I don't understand," Chloe stammered, the words catching in her throat. "I think you do," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a cold, precise whisper, meant only for Chloe. "You thought you found a bigger fish. You thought you could discard my husband because you'd found a billionaire. But the billionaire was a fantasy, a story, one we wrote just for you." Chloe's eyes darted around. People were staring openly now, their phones half raised. She saw Olivia Brent standing nearby, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She saw Julian frozen by the bar, his face a mask of dawning abject horror as he finally understood the full scope of what was happening. He wasn't just a cheated-on husband. He was a pawn in his wife's brutal, intricate game of revenge. He had been discarded and humiliated by Chloe, only to discover that his own wife had orchestrated the entire thing. "Every chance meeting," Marcus explained, enjoying his monologue. "Every gift, every flight. Every word I said to you was a line in a script written by my sister. You're not a gold digger, Chloe. You're just a fool. You fell for the oldest trick in the book, your own greed." The humiliation was a physical force pressing in on her, stealing the air from her lungs. The silver dress felt like a suit of armor that had just been melted onto her skin. Her grand entrance had become a public execution. "My husband was weak," Catherine said, her voice cutting through Chloe's shock. "And you are predatory. You both deserved a lesson in consequences. You, Miss Vance, wanted a foundation of wealth. Instead, you'll be a cautionary tale. And my husband," she glanced over at Julian, her eyes like chips of ice, "has learned what it feels like to be deemed not enough." Chloe stood there, stripped bare, in the center of the glittering ballroom. The life she had fantasized about, the victory, she had tasted all of it, was a lie, a carefully constructed stage, and she was the only one who hadn't known she was an actor in a tragedy. She turned and fled, pushing through the crowd of stunned, whispering faces, the sound of their judgment chasing her out into the cold New York night. Catherine watched her go, her expression unreadable. She had not raised her voice. She had not cried. She had simply taken a predator, a problem, and dismantled it with the cold, quiet efficiency of a bomb disposal expert. She then turned her gaze back to her husband, who stood pale and broken across the room. The first part of her plan was complete. The second was about to begin. The aftermath of the gala was a bloodbath in the gossip columns and social media feeds. The story was too delicious to ignore the ambitious mistress, the fake billionaire, and the brilliant pregnant wife who had orchestrated the most elaborate revenge plot New York society had ever seen. The Sterling Gambit, one blog dubbed it. Chloe Vance became an overnight pariah. Her name, her face, her carefully curated ambition, all were now punchlines. She was fired from her marketing job for conduct unbecoming of the company's image. Her landlord started eviction proceedings. The friends who had cheered on her gold-digging like Zara vanished as if they'd never existed. Chloe was erased, a ghost haunting the city she had tried to conquer. But for Catherine, the public humiliation of her rival was only the first step. The true test, the real reconstruction, had to happen within the silent, opulent walls of their penthouse. Julian came home that night, or rather in the early hours of the morning, a broken man. The arrogance had been flayed from him, leaving behind a raw, quivering shame. He found Catherine in the living room, sitting in an armchair, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. The city lights twinkled behind her, oblivious. He started with the usual script. The apologies, the pleas, the self-flagellation. Catherine, I am so sorry. I was a fool, an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking. I love you. I love our baby. Please, please forgive me. The words tumbled out, desperate and rehearsed. Catherine listened patiently, her hands resting on her stomach. She let him exhaust himself, let the silence fall after his pathetic monologue. When she finally spoke, her voice was not angry. It was not hurt. It was the calm, measured voice of a CEO outlining the terms of a merger, and it terrified him more than any shouting match could have. Stop, she said simply. The word cut through his pleading. Your apology is irrelevant right now. It's a reflex. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry you were made to look like a fool. The kind of sorrow that matters, the kind that leads to change, takes time to cultivate. You haven't had that time. What do you want me to do? He whispered, his voice cracking. I'll do anything. I know you will, she said, because you're cornered. What I want is not for you to do anything. What I want is for you to understand why I did what I did. She stood up and walked to the window looking out over their kingdom. This wasn't just about punishing that woman, Julian. This was about you. You have a fundamental weakness. It's your ego. It needs constant validation. And when you felt the slightest bit neglected or bored, you sought it elsewhere. You didn't just have an affair. You risked everything. Our family, our future, the stability this child deserves for a cheap thrill and an ego boost. She turned back to him. I could have divorced you. I could have taken half of your company and walked away. My family would have supported me. But that felt insufficient. Because the problem, your weakness, would remain. You would just find another woman and another, and our child would grow up with a father who was a revolving door of indiscretions. She walked to the desk and picked up a thick folder of documents her lawyer had drawn up that week. She placed it on the coffee table between them. "So this is what is going to happen. This is not a negotiation." He looked at the folder as if it were a bomb. "This is a post-nuptial agreement," she explained. "It transfers 60% of your shares in Croft Innovations, along with a controlling interest in our joint liquid assets, into a trust. A trust for our child of which I am the sole trustee until they come of age. You will retain your title as CEO. You will still draw your salary. But your decision-making power in the company and in our finances is now shared. I will have a permanent seat on the board. Your personal spending will be subject to review. We will be partners in the truest sense of the word, Julian. Your kingdom is no longer solely yours." He stared at her aghast. This was more than punishment. This was a coup, a complete restructuring of their entire existence. "You're taking my company," he breathed. "No," she corrected him calmly. "I am protecting our family's primary asset. You proved you were a poor steward, that you could be compromised. So I am installing a new system of checks and balances. Think of me as your personal board of directors." He saw the checkmate. If he refused, she would divorce him, and the ensuing scandal, combined with the loss of the Sterling family's backing and connections, would gut the company anyway. He would lose her his child and a massive chunk of his fortune. Her plan gave him a path, however narrow and humbling, to keep all three. "And us?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What happens to us? We will stay married," Catherine said. "Our child will be born with a father and a mother under the same roof. You will sleep in the guest room. You will attend counseling. You will work every single day to earn back a fraction of the trust you shattered. Forgiveness is not on the table. It is not something I can give you right now. But you may in time earn the right to ask for it again." She laid out the new foundation of their life, built upon the ashes of the old one. There was no passion in her voice, only purpose. She had seen the crack in their gilded cage, and instead of trying to patch it, she had torn it down, and was now building a fortress in its place. A fortress to protect her child. Julian Croft, the tech visionary. The master of his universe finally understood true power. It wasn't in flashy deals or public acclaim. It was in the quiet, unyielding resolve of the woman standing before him. He had mistaken her grace for weakness, her composure for complacency. He now saw it for what it was, the calm surface of a deep and formidable ocean. He picked up a pen, his hand shaking, and signed the documents. He signed away control of the empire he had built, handing the keys to the woman he had betrayed. It was the end of his reign, and for Catherine and the child she carried, it was the beginning of a new, unshakable dynasty, founded not on a naive belief in love, but on the cold, hard certainty of control. Their future would not be a fairy tale, but it would be secure. And in their world, that was the only happily ever after that truly mattered. And there you have it, a story not just of infidelity, but of breathtaking strategy and icy revenge. Catherine Croft proves that the most dangerous woman is not the one who screams and throws plates, but the one who smiles, waits and dismantles her enemies with the precision of a chess grandmaster. She didn't just get even. She rewrote the rules of the entire game, securing her child's future and putting her husband firmly in his place. What did you think of her plan? Was it brilliant justice or a step too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of drama, intrigue, and powerful people getting exactly what they deserve, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with someone who appreciates a well-served plate of revenge. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama. You never know whose perfect world is about to come crashing down.